Welcome back to our news bulletin. The US has recorded over 10,000 cases of the novel coronavirus in the last 24 hours, bringing the total to over 69,000. The global death toll from the pandemic is now over 21,000, with over 472,000 infections. More in this report.
The fight against the new coronavirus continues as countries try to implement stricter measures to contain the pandemic. Southern Europe still remains at the epicenter of pandemic as Spain reported 738 deaths overnight. It is now the second country to surpass China's death toll. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has asked the parliament to extend a lockdown until April 11.
I am sure that the parliament and the political forces that form it will understand the situation of national emergency the country is living in. And I hope that you support the extension of this state of alarm until April 11. Because to fight the virus, it is essential to keep depriving it of its main arm, which are social contacts.
The World Health Organization has asked all countries to use the second window of opportunity to suppress and stop transmission of COVID-19.
We still believe that there is opportunity. I think we squandered the first window of opportunity, but we are saying today in my message, I made it clear that this is a second opportunity which we should not squander.
More countries are imposing lockdowns, shutting down schools, restaurants and banning free movement unless absolutely unavoidable. Russia's government has ordered the Civil Aviation Authority to suspend all regular and charter flights to and from the country from March 27th.
In an effort to contain the spread, the Pentagon has halted all overseas travel for US troops for 60 days in a bid to mitigate the spread of novel coronavirus. In a statement, Defense Secretary Mark Esper said the order applies to all service members, Defense Department civilian personnel and their families. The statement said under some conditions, exceptions can be granted, including travel by patients and medical providers for treatment. It said troops whose temporary duty assignment ends during this period can return to their home station. Meanwhile, France says it will withdraw all its troops from Iraq until further notice due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan will chair the second meeting of the National Coordination Committee on COVID-19 today. Special Assistant to PM on Health Zafar Mirza said the meeting will review status of the decisions taken during the previous meeting. Mirza said the Committee of Parliamentarians is being constituted to oversee the situation due to coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, the total number of deaths due to the virus has reached 8, with over 1,100 confirmed cases. Mirza said 21 patients have recovered from the illness so far. Yesterday, Pakistan received 500,000 masks from China as an aid to fight the coronavirus. Pakistan has offered to host a video conference of the SAARC health ministers to coordinate efforts to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Farooqi says Islamabad stands firm on its commitment to the South Asian Forum. In a briefing in Islamabad, Farooqi said India must end its communications blackout and curfew in occupied Jammu and Kashmir amid the pandemic. She said the occupied territory has been reeling under Indian atrocities for 235 days. Farooqi said Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi spoke on the phone with his German and French counterparts. She said Qureshi reiterated Pakistan's call to end unilateral US sanctions on Iran amid coronavirus. US envoy for Afghanistan Zalmay Khalilzad says the Taliban and Kabul have agreed to start the prisoner release from March 31st. He said officials from both sides held a video conference to discuss technical aspects of the exchange. Khalilzad said the discussion is a positive development and such meetings will continue to facilitate the peace process. Earlier, Afghan National Security Council said 100 Taliban prisoners will be released on assurances they won't return to fighting. Meanwhile, President Ashraf Ghani says he has finalized a list of 20 delegates for intra-Afghan talks under the Doha peace deal. But US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he was frustrated after a visit to Afghanistan this week. In Kabul, Pompeo failed to reach an agreement to end to a leadership feud between Ghani and Abdullah. Now from the Middle East, Yemen's Houthi rebels say they welcome the announcement of the Saudi-led coalition to support a ceasefire amid coronavirus pandemic. In a tweet, a leader of the rebel forces, Mohammed Ali al-Houthi, says they are now waiting for the truce to take effect. Earlier, the coalition said it supports the Yemeni government's decision to accept the UN's call for a ceasefire to combat COVID-19. The coalition spokesperson, Colonel Turki al-Maliki, said it backs the steps being taken for confidence-building measures on the humanitarian and economic fronts. On Monday, Guterres called for an immediate global ceasefire to protect war-ravaged communities from the coronavirus pandemic. The U.S. has called on the Syrian government to release imprisoned civilians, including Americans, over the aggressively spreading coronavirus. The State Department says it has asked President Bashar al-Assad to protect detainees being held in overcrowded and inhumane conditions. It said prison conditions are prime for quick spread of the virus, which will have devastating impacts on detainees. Earlier, a Human Rights Watch report said nearly 100,000 people are being held in Syria's prisons. It said most of them have been arbitrarily detained after taking part in protests. On Sunday, the Syrian government confirmed its first case of the COVID-19. Turkey says 2 of its soldiers have been killed and 2 others wounded in a mortar attack by the Kurdish militants in northern Iraq. The Defense Ministry said Kurdish targets were destroyed in retaliation and 8 militants were killed. The ministry said Kurdistan Workers' Party militants carried out the attack in the Haftanin region. It said Ankara will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by terrorists. The ministry said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Iraq says 2 rockets struck Baghdad's heavily fortified Green Zone, which houses foreign missions, including the U.S. consulate. In a statement, the military said Katyusha rockets fell overnight, but no casualties were reported. The statement said the rockets fell near Baghdad Operation Command. No group has yet claimed responsibility. Since late October, there have been 25 rocket attacks on U.S. interests in Iraq. No attacks have been claimed, but Washington blames Iraq's Kataib Hezbollah militant faction. In another news, 5 people have been killed, including a district commissioner, after an improvised explosive device attack near the Somali-Kenyan border. Police says several others were wounded in the roadside bombing. Police said the landmine targeted a vehicle carrying Ras Kamboni District Commissioner Abdullahi Dere. The Somali-based Al-Qaeda affiliated group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for this attack. The group also claimed responsibility for a suicide bombing in the capital Mogadishu on Wednesday. Al-Shabaab said it killed 9 government soldiers and wounded more than 24 others. In Egypt, at least 16 people have been killed in a multi-car crash in the capital city of Cairo. Local media says 15 others were injured in the accident. Local media says the collision took place a few hours after Egypt implemented a nighttime curfew to contain the COVID-19 spread. It said the injured have been rushed to a hospital for treatment. Police said an investigation is underway to determine the cause of the incident. A man charged with murdering 51 people at 2 mosques in New Zealand's Christchurch City a year ago has pleaded guilty. Through a video link from his prison cell, Brant Tarrant also admitted the attempted murder of another 40 people and 1 terrorism charge. New Zealand is in a state of lockdown due to the coronavirus outbreak, and the plea was made at a scaled-down court hearing in Christchurch High Court. No members of the public were allowed into the hearing, and Tarrant and his lawyers appeared via video link. A representative of the 2 mosques which were attacked was allowed to attend the hearing to represent the victims and their families. After confession, he has been convicted of all charges, with sentencing to occur later this year. In Kosovo, coalition government has collapsed after no confidence vote in Prime Minister Albin Kurti's leadership was backed by a majority of MPs. The vote was brought by a junior coalition partner, angered by Kurti's approach to tackling the coronavirus outbreak. The government was dismissed after a dispute over whether to declare a state of emergency to combat the pandemic. Coalition partner LDK filed the motion after Kurti sacked LDK member Ajim Veliu as Interior Minister. The removal of the Interior Minister followed other disagreements, notably on whether a tariff of 100% on goods produced in Balkan rival Serbia should be abolished.
With 82 votes for the motion, 32 against and 1 abstention, I find that the Parliament has approved the motion of no confidence in the government.
Kurti said his dismissal was to remove an obstacle to allow Kosovo president and his Serbian counterpart to swap territories as part of deal between Pristina and Belgrade. In 2018, the two presidents signaled they may agree to a land swap to resolve territorial claims, but face strong opposition. We now go to the epicenter of coronavirus outbreak, Italy. A new study has found new coronavirus-infected people showing no symptoms carry the same viral risk as symptomatic patients. The research was conducted in Lombardy, one of the worst affected regions in Italy. The paper was based on an analysis of 5,830 laboratory-confirmed cases between 14th January and 8th March, with half of the subjects under the age of 50. An earlier study in Chinese city of Wuhan suggested about 60% of people who contract the infection show no symptoms. Meanwhile, another study showed that 3 to 10% of recovered patients tested positive again at a later time. Doctors from Tongji Hospital in Wuhan said they found no evidence that recovered people got infected again. Chile has quarantined over 1 million people in Santiago for 7 days after the coronavirus infections in the country topped 1,000. South American countries have toughened up their measures in the fight against the deadly pandemic. This report will now tell you more.
Nations across the South American continent have taken drastic measures to combat the novel coronavirus as it threatens global health and economy. Panama and Bolivia are the latest to enforce curfews and ban all air travel. With 38 infections, Bolivia has declared a national health emergency and extended its border lockdown until April 15th.
El no cumplimiento de la cuarentena.
In recent days, the risk of contagion has increased because of a failure to abide by quarantine measures. This is why I am announcing a state of public health emergency for this quarantine to be abided by. From tomorrow, Thursday, March 26 at midnight, the state of emergency will be in place throughout the country, and it will be in place until April 15.
Mexico has installed its first coronavirus drive-through testing station in its capital, Mexico City. Over 32,000 tourists have been instructed to stay put in their hotels in Cuba, while hundreds are stuck at the Bogota airport amid Colombia's 19-day quarantine.
It is hard to sleep here because we get cold. Because even though they clean and everything, the insects bite us. There's this thing that makes noise all night. The lights go on and off all night. The baby obviously isn't used to sleeping on these things, neither am I. With my belly like it is, it's hard to sleep here and we haven't had a good night.
Meanwhile, Honduras has deployed its armed forces to distribute food aid to vulnerable families amid the lockdown. Experts say that Latin America, that is home to about 8.5% of the global population, could be among the worst affected regions by the pandemic.
The UK Parliament has shut down until April 21st at the earliest to combat the spread of coronavirus. Emergency laws to deal with the pandemic have been rushed through both houses after being given royal assent earlier. The MPs voted to plan for a managed return to work on April 21st to deal with budget legislation. The Scottish Parliament chamber was also shut down, but lawmakers will return on April 1st in order to consider emergency coronavirus legislation. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle said work was underway to give MPs technology they needed to stay connected. The cabinet is expected to continue to meet via video conferencing. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Health authorities in 5 Arab countries have confirmed new cases of the novel coronavirus.
Tunisia's health ministry said a 56-year-old man has died from the virus in the south of capital Tunis, bringing the total deaths to 4. The North African country has reported a total of 173 infection cases so far. In Lebanon, the health ministry reported 29 new infections, taking the total cases to 333. Oman's health ministry said 17 new cases were reported in the country, taking the total infections to 99. Kuwait also recorded 4 new cases, increasing the total to 195. Palestinian health authorities also reported 2 new coronavirus cases, raising the total infections to 71.
Thousands of refugees are trapped in dangerously overcrowded, deplorable conditions in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. While lockdown imposed by governments have also sparked an exodus of thousands of migrant workers. International humanitarian organizations have called on governments to take effective action to avert a public health crisis. Details in this report.
The COVID-19 pandemic continues to rip apart global infrastructures, killing thousands of people and rendering national governments helpless. Migrant workers and refugees continue to be most vulnerable as they are forced to remain in conditions that violate their fundamental rights. Over 3,000 families languish in Somalia's refugee camps, who are at heightened risk in the face of the growing threat of COVID-19 transmission. In Europe, Greece is hosting almost 37,427 people in overcrowded facilities with a total capacity of just 6,095. Medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières said a coronavirus outbreak in Greece's migrant camps would spread rapidly due to overcrowding and unsanitary conditions.
Given the situation of the Mortar camp, with this 22,000 people packed into a very, very small area, the promiscuity and the lack of hygiene in the camp is a perfect situation for an outbreak. Now, we all know that COVID-19 is very infectious.
Over 4 million Venezuelan migrants live in Latin America, in cities that are also at risk of contracting the virus, as most lack access to healthcare and state welfare. While about 60,000 migrant workers living in Thailand have already fled the country since it imposed a lockdown. Many countries, including Canada, have announced they will no longer accept irregular migrants crossing borders from neighboring countries.
We recognize that these are exceptional times, and someone who comes to the border to request asylum will be turned back to American authorities, as happens right now when someone comes to an official border crossing and requests asylum. We turn them over to American authorities at the border where they are released.
Migrant populations around the world, often lacking healthcare and the ability to isolate themselves, continues to be among the most vulnerable to coronavirus transmission.
The new coronavirus pandemic has postponed or cancelled a number of events and celebrations all around the world. But birthdays are supposedly events that can neither be delayed nor called off. Find out how children are celebrating their birthdays amid the pandemic in this report.
When a preschooler Harry was told his birthday party would be cancelled due to coronavirus lockdown, a London-based drama group came to the rescue. With an online alternative, Harry got his frozen celebration with all his friends and family watching via multi-screen, and he even had a happy birthday sung to him in unison.
Happy birthday. Normal parties are at somewhere else, not at home, but if there's germs crawling around, you can't go outside, so we have to stay indoors.
Entertainers and actors Jessica Kingsley and Joshua Diffley of Magical Quest dressed as characters from the classy Disney family. Both were thrilled at the success of the new video chat-based celebration.
They weren't as distracted because when you're at a party there are balloons and things happening all around, but they were really focused. Yeah. I guess they're very used to looking at their screens.
Yes.
Goggle vision, but it was like they were really focused on us. It did feel really like performing.
Yeah.
It was performing.
Yeah.
It was performing.
I don't know what you were doing. I was definitely performing.
Harvey's parents says they just did not manage to have a party, but it was so special that no one has ever done that before.
As lockdowns stunt economic activity worldwide, countries and global financial institutions continue taking measures. Germany's lower house of parliament has approved a $814 billion aid package to cushion the economy from the direct impact of the coronavirus outbreak. The debt ceiling, which is anchored in German law and limits annual government borrowing, was also suspended, allowing access to another $170 billion in 2020. Meanwhile, in addition to an $80 billion stimulus package, South Korea's central bank decided to provide unlimited liquidity for the next 3 months. The U.S. Senate also approved a $2 trillion bipartisan bill aimed at helping unemployed workers and industries hurt by the pandemic.
I'm proud to announce tonight not a single senator voted against this $2 trillion rescue bill to save American individuals, small businesses, large businesses, and to provide considerable funding.
Elsewhere, France announced it will roll out over $4 billion in a liquidity support plan for startups in the wake of coronavirus outbreak. Now, the World Bank and IMF have urged official bilateral creditors to provide immediate debt relief to the world's poorest countries. They said those nations, home to a quarter of the world's population, will be hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. In a joint statement, the institutions called on creditors to immediately suspend debt payments from International Development Association countries. Most of the 76 countries receiving IDA support have gross national income per capita of below $1,175. The World Bank and the IMF said suspending debt payments would provide a global sense of relief for developing countries. They also urged the world's 20 largest economies to support their call for action. In a tweet, Pakistan's State Minister of Revenue, Hamad Azhar, welcomed the joint statement. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.